everyone, today we'll be featuring the HB deck that came from the deck building exercise last time. To jog your memory, this is Surat City Grid with Next Dice and I'm up against a Kate. So, I kept an opening hand hoping that I would draw into ice. Guess what? I did not. So I'm forced to have a very subpar first turn, but thankfully my opponent is playing very passively with setting up the drip economy, Beth, and data folding. So I was able to get Jackson out, which was really nice, and then immediately defend R&D in case an indexing comes over. Make no mistake, this is a very bad start and I really shouldn't be keeping this opening hand. I just thought that not having any agendas in my opening hand would be a good reason to keep it, because it could get a lot worse if I mulligan, but in retrospect, a mulligan was definitely the correct call. My opponent gets an SMC out, so Clot is a worry, and SacCon on the table confirms that I should be worried about Clot, but they immediately sacked the SMC for a Tapeworm. Very interesting. And in chat, I remarked that it was oppressive as heck. Tapeworm plus Beth. That is some crazy money. Especially considering my state right now. I got a lot of early econ, so now I'm on 19 credits. This gives my opponent 3 credits from Tapeworm and 1 click from Beth, plus 3 credits that's going to come from the Underworld Contacts and the data folding, so my opponent is getting very far ahead. To counteract this, I do not have a choice. I need to immediately fast advance this Vitruvius from my hand to bring myself down to a reasonable credit level and suppress the Beth and Tapeworm. My opponent then smartly runs the Jeeves, leaving me without an option of fast advancing the corporate sales team from hand. I need the Jeeves. If you remember, this deck is based on 4-2 agendas. I want to score 4-2 agendas, I need the Jeeves. So this is why I use the friends in high places here. Even though I've no second target, this is how badly I need the Jeeves. It also helps that friends in high places cost me 2 credits. This puts me on 9 credits and denies the Tapeworm and Beth upgrade. But my opponent's slowly but surely setting up, and now they have a clone chip on the table. Clone chip is bad news because obviously Clot threat. But something has to be done here. So I think about it for a while and I realize that Clot is never going to hit the table. With the clone chip on the table, my opponent can easily just Clot lock me forever until I find a Cyberdex. And even if I do find a Cyberdex, Sacrificial Construct is a thing that's installed on the table. So this is what led me to think very long and hard about this. And eventually I came to the conclusion that I needed to bait my opponent into using Clot. So no choice here, I'm going to sack the Vitruvius. I know my opponent is going to Clot this. I have to give it up. It would be better if I had some way to defend this fast advanced agenda. You know, something like next silver, next bronze to protect the agenda, but nope, my draw hasn't been that good. I've only found 2 ice this entire game because reasons. So you never ever want to sacrifice so much tempo to bait out a Clot. I had to lose the Baltic label from my hand. I had to lose 6 credits, 4 from the Baltic, 2 from advancing the agenda, and lose basically my entire turn. And they get a free agenda from all of this. This is the worst, and this probably means I'm going to lose the game. No choice, I have to give it up here. I just need to bait out the Clot. The one interesting thing why I'm doing this is, if you notice in my hand, I have an Arc Lockdown. The reason I bait out the Clot here is because I needed to get the Clot into the bin. So on my turn, I'm going to purge and res the G Smart Baroids, which gives me an extra click for purging, since I spent 3 clicks on the same action of purging. They did not prevent the trashing of Clot, but they prevented the trashing of Tapeworm instead, so I was able to Arc knock down the Clot with my final click. So this is the 1-2 combo. If you have Jeeves, you can much more easily do this. Without Jeeves, you have to wait for a full entire turn before you can Arc knock down, which is bad news because waiting for the full entire turn means that the next turn you won't be able to Baltic an agenda. Whereas in this case, I can Baltic if I want to. Not that it makes a difference because I'm super poor. But with only 2 credits to my name, Beth won't trigger, Tapeworm won't trigger, but I can't score agendas either. Meanwhile, my opponent's hammering my R&D. I can't rest the Architect on it. So my opponent gets to 4 points and draws me a couple of cards. I actually don't mind my opponent drawing me cards. That's really nice of him. But they do get to match point. Yeah, this is not looking good at all. Not at all. So first priority here is to find the CVS on a server that my opponent will probably run. In this case, it's probably going to be R&D. So I'm considering lateral growth into CVS on R&D. So if they do run R&D, the Tapeworm goes. But nope, I decided to do HQ instead. Makes more sense. This is a very huge telegraph. But the more important reason here is I need to deter my opponent from running HQ here. They could easily run my undefended HQ, and I need to deter them because I have this sales team that needs to get scored. So I protect HQ here, and after some time notice my opponent has no breakers yet. They got to 6 points without breakers, and they're not even criminal, they're shaper. This is ridiculous. I'm doing a very good job of helping my opponent win here. And all the while they're setting up their econ engine. Look at it, it's a massive pain to deal with. 5 drip economy cards, 1 Bev, 1 Tapworm. Oh dear, I'm in a lot of trouble. Can I somehow pull this back? We shall see. First priority here is to... Whoa, 2 agendas. Okay, gotta get them out of the system. Get the Baltic label with Vitruvius and score the sales team. Now, sales team is actually not the ideal agenda to score here. The problem here is I do need the Baltic labels at this point more than the money. Money is easily obtainable. Click for 3 credits, get a Jeeves click. That's efficiency. Whereas with sales team, the problem is I can't score the other sales team in my hand. Why? Because I don't have a Baltic label. I'll need to wait for something like a Jackson Howard to appear, or a Friends in High Places to get the Baltics back in my deck. So this is going to take a long time. In the meantime, my opponent will happily dig through my R&D with Equivocation, which is causing me problems, shall I say. Thankfully, my opponent has finally shown their rig with Inti and Artman. Turing on R&D is actually a really good idea here. Force my opponent to find their decoder before they can continue sieging R&D, because at this point R&D is free game for my opponent. Between Cipher and Artman, they can get through the Architect. So here I'm forced to rest the Turing. Not too difficult. I still have a lot of money on my sales team, so all that's good. But I do need the Baltic labels ASAP to score the sales team. And it doesn't help that I'm drawing to more agendas. So this is why I kind of need to defend HQ here. Between the CVS to purge Tapworm and the Unknown Ice, I think it's rather untempting for my opponent to run HQ. And just to be safe, since they have Cipher to get through my Ice, I'm going to double Ice HQ. And decide to throw away something. So the game's still not looking good for me, but at least I'm on 4 points. My opponent runs HQ, suspecting something's up, and they'd be right about that. I'm gonna res the Mother Goddess here. Will they break and continue? Yes, they will continue into the next bronze. 2 strength next bronze. They can't break it. They don't have a decoder. All they have is Inti and Shrike. They still haven't found a decoder, even though they have only 11 cards left in the deck. Now my opponent smartly pivots to the remote to trash my Jeeves. Unfortunately for my opponent, there's another one coming. I don't worry too much about that. Yeah, losing Jeeves is the least of my problems. Of course, my opponent needs to keep running my remote to ensure that I'm not jamming agendas in there. Maybe I should have jammed something in there, given that my opponent is not interested in making their way in at all. It's very hard for me to jam anything in there. And finally, Surat City Grid appears, but at this time, it's too little too late. With the amount of pressure my opponent put on my HQ and remote, there's no Unrest Ice left on the board. Surat City Grid doesn't come in very useful this game. Which is one reason why I did not upload this game, to be honest, in the deck building exercise, which was meant to exhibit the power of Surat City Grid. It just doesn't work out all the time, and this is something you should expect from a card that isn't very high above the power curve. Well, that's fine, it's okay. It is useful in other matchups. This is just not Surat City Grid's time to shine. Oh well, we'll move on. Now, my sales team is starting to run out, but that's fine. It has given me a lot of money, enough to res all the ice and HQ on the remote so far, so I'm pretty happy about that. My opponent still hasn't found a decoder, and all I need to do is to find my fast advanced mechanisms. But I'm not finding it. They're not coming. Do I draw here? I don't know. I know that in time to come, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble, so I need to try to distract my opponent by spamming as much as I can. In this case, a double Jeeves. Yeah, with an ice on the outer one for insurance. My opponent can easily trash both Jeeves at this point with their insane drip economy, so I'm basically forced to tax them with ice at this point. If they are going to run into my remotes, they are going to be forced to help me res my next ice. Unfortunately, because I put next ice on my remotes, this means that I don't actually have next ice for my centrals. R&D is where I need the next silver, but it's not going there. Instead, all I have is a magnet on R&D, which is so easily broken. A silver on R&D would be a lot more of an impeding factor. Instead, my opponent gets a rather free access, draws me my silver, still doesn't find a winning agenda, goes again, With equivocation, they can dig, unlike with R&D interface. If they have R&D interface, they would see the same two cards, but with equivocation, they can force me to draw and keep seeing fresh cards on multiple runs, which is really neat. In fact, my opponent can run 3 times this way and see 4 cards, which is pretty good. Well, the downside, of course, is if I survive this, which I do, my opponent has now drawn me a lot of cards to help me defend R&D. I'm going to take some credits here and ice R&D with the silver that I've always been looking for. Now, this is going to cost my opponent a lot to get through, now that they have forced res 3 next dice so far. Even though they run Cipher, my opponent's not on Parasite. You'll notice that Influence spend a lot of Tapworm, Shrike, Clot. They don't have the influence for Parasites, so this silver is going to be super taxing. My opponent can't run 3 times a turn like they used to. They can only make 1 run and essentially see 2 cards. But by this point, it's very probable that my opponent will just win outright. There are still 2 agendas left in R&D. The agendas came out fast and furious in the early game, but now they've definitely slowed down to a halt. There's still a good chance of my opponent seeing it on R&D though. Let's see. Do they trigger equivocation? They do. It's a Biotic labor. They will trigger it. Give me the Biotic that I've been looking for. But without the money, I can't actually score the sales team at this point. So this is a very challenging game. My opponent knows that Fast Advance is live. They might need to check my HQ. They know that Clot has been removed from the game, so they can't stop my Fast Advance, even with the Sacrificial Construct out. This is the beauty of including Arc Lockdown in this deck. It works against Siphon, it works against Levy, but in this particular matchup, getting rid of the Clot was huge. All I do is take money here. Hopefully this baits my opponent into running my HQ, and hopefully they miss, because this is what I need to get it back into the game. But nope, they're tunnel visioning into R&D. I mean, why not? With Study Guide out, they can break Turing and Magnet with ease. They see an ABT on the top of the deck, and that's game for them. Well, given that wasn't the most impressive performance by my Corp deck, I guess there's nothing to talk about it. Why not? Let's talk about my opponent's Shaper deck instead. That Drippy Kate deck is quite trippy, I must say. It is really insane. It seems to run a lot of jank cards, but when they come together, it seems to work really well. And when you dig down deeper, you realize that beyond all the jank, a lot of the cards are actually very well informed in this current meta. If you're watching this video long after it's been uploaded, this might not be very relevant because I'm going to talk in the context of the Quorum meta. Anyway, this Kate deck has answers in it that counters a lot of Corp win conditions. As long as it can find these answers before the Corp sets up their win condition, yeah, this Kate deck can do a very good job at controlling the Corp, as they did against me. Against Fast Advance, there is Clot with Sacrificial Construct to back it up against the likes of Cerebral Imaging, which does all that comboing Fast Advance in 1 turn. Clot Satcon with Clone Chip does a very good job at impeding CI. Against Glacier, it has a pretty good Icebreaker suite as well. This I'll talk about in more detail on the next slide. Finally, against Tag and Bag, you might have noticed my opponent pitch New Angela City Hall in the bin. That is very useful at covering the tag matchups, those that attempt to land breaking news into exchange of information, or those that try to use the scumbag 24/7 tactics. Natch covers it all. It's pretty amazing. So as a result, a lot of Corp decks don't actually have a lot of answers to this, and if your Corp deck's not fast enough, you probably lose to this Kate deck at the end of the day. Now, let's talk about the Icebreaker suite, because I think this is one of the most interesting features of this deck. Very unique, and it works out a lot better than you think it does in the current meta. For Barrier Breaker, you have Inti, the very lowly Inti, often overlooked. Inti is pretty amazing in the current meta, where the most common barriers are the small gear check barriers, the likes of Vanilla, Resistor, Nick Silver, and Paper Wall in Cerebral Imaging. This is actually quite important. A lot of people eschew high strength barriers because the combination of Paperclip and Cipher make it very difficult to play high strength barriers. It's just not worth the investment in res cost. So with a lot of people turning to cheaper barriers, Inti makes very short work of it, and is a very good meta call. On the other hand, what people are trying to use are high strength code gates. This is because code gates tend to have very good res to strength ratios. Think of Archangel, for example, Fairchild 3. Or are super punishing, the likes of DNA Tracker, Mausolus. So, Many corps are relying on these high strength code gates instead, and this deck really punishes that because Study Guide is the code gate breaker of choice and is super efficient. 1 credit per set routine, regardless of strength. Amazing. Strike, on the other hand, is very expensive and is a breaker I don't encourage most people to play, but is suitable in this deck because it runs so much economy. Is insane. Usually in Magnum Opus decks, you don't run any other form of economy, you just have Magnum Opus to carry you through the entire game. But this deck, boy, it runs Data Folding, Underworld Context, and of course, Tapworm and Beth. In fact, Tapworm sometimes is so important that, as you saw my opponent did, they use their first SMC for the Tapworm. Even before using it as a clock threat, they got the Tapworm out first. This was how much my opponent valued that Tapworm. Valued it so much that they even used a SACCON on it in this game. So yes, with my opponent's deck build, they could afford to run Strike and be able to break stuff like Architect with ease. Even though it costs 4 credits per break, the drip economy evens that out. The best thing about the deck is that it has a catch-all safety net in the form of Artman Cipher. Artman Cipher makes short work of any ice at all. While it's not as oppressive as Paris Cipher, it still allows the runner to get past any unknown ice without worrying about not being able to break it. So even if you're playing an off-meta deck, something like a Blue Sun that features high-strength barriers or sentries that tags out into your strike, this deck can still catch you out with Artman Cipher. And yeah, once it gets set up, it can be very difficult to lock this deck out of R&D or any remote server for that matter. And this is why I think this Icebreaker suite is very well informed in the current meta and is rather effective in my opinion. This is one way you can go about deck building, identifying the weakness in core ice suites and tweaking your Icebreaker suite to be super effective against the current meta. I like this. Well, hope you found this informative. I sure have learned quite a bit from this game. Thanks for watching as always, and happy net running. Goodbye.